My name is Rachel Natkunda, the Vice President of the Safety and Health Association of Uganda, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. I'm a very proud and active member of SHAO, and I'm very passionate about advancing workplace safety and health. It goes without saying that it's an honor for me to be part of this learning journey with all of you. And I look forward to us learning and unlearning together. Today we have the pleasure of having Libby as our facilitator, a renowned safety and risk specialist who will be sharing her expertise in incident investigation and improvement. About 2 months ago, we had Prof. Maureen that took us through our webinar, and this one is sort of building onto that. For those that are joining our webinar for the first time, SHAO usually organizes monthly webinars, and the recordings are shared on the YouTube channel. A link will be shared in the chat for you to follow up on any webinars that you've missed, inclusive of the one of Professor Maureen. So who is Libby? She's a respected safety and risk specialist with expertise in critical control management, incident investigation, and layered risk approaches across high hazard industries. She facilitates nationally recognized programs, including the risk management for supervisors and the global minerals industry risk management course, and plays a key role in the University of Queensland's critical risk control masterclass series. With a background in adult education and systems thinking, Libby supports government, mining, and energy organizations in improving risk management practices, strengthening critical controls, and building investigation capability. She's known for her practical, collaborative approach and is committed to helping organizations prevent fatalities and serious harm through better systems, training, and leadership. So I believe she's the best person to be facilitating this webinar. So today's topic, when prevention fails, investigating to understand and improve, is a very relevant topic for most of us safety professionals. And I will be exploring ways to investigate incidents effectively and use those insights to drive improvement. But before I invite Lily to take on the floor, I would like to invite all of us to the Vision Zero conference, which will take place very soon. That is in August 27th, 28th, and 29th. It is a 3 days conference, international conference, and we'd like to invite all of you on the call and also for you to tell a friend to join us in this conference. A link to the website will also be dropped in the chat. Also to invite you to the WASPAC conference. WASPAC is our partner in the region. That is our Workplace Safety Association in Kenya. They have their 3rd annual conference and gala dinner that will be taking place on 13th and 14th November. A link also, if there's a WASPAC representative, you could drop a link for registration in the chat so that members can register and start paying for the conference. And finally, I'd like to invite you to the SHAO annual dinner that will be on 6th December. So we have 3 important events in the region, and would be happy to have all of you there. At this point, I'd like to invite the SHAO president, Mr. Sunday Asidri, in a minute to give welcome remarks and hand over the microphone to Libby to take us through the webinar. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. President.
All right, thank you. Just confirm that I'm audible enough.
Yes, you are.
All right, thank you, Madam Vice President, our moderator for today's session. Thank you so much for putting up this. Our partners and from Uganda and from our sister associations within the region and across Africa who have joined us today. The committee chairpersons who have joined us for this session, and your members, the distinguished ex-officials who are here with us, the proud SAO members, and those who have not yet joined the Health and Safety Association of Uganda, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. My name is Sunday Achidri. I am the current president of the Health and Safety Association. Indeed, it's an honor for me to welcome you to this important webinar. As the Vice President said, it's organized by the Health and Safety Association under the theme, When Preventions Fail, Investigate into, Understand and Improve. We need to acknowledge the reality that despite our best efforts in risk assessment, in trainings, and implementing some of the robust health and safety management systems, accidents and occupational hazards, they still do occur. So when prevention fail, it is not just a setback. It's an opportunity for us to investigate thoroughly, an opportunity for us to learn critically, and also an opportunity for us to improve the systems. So today's discussion is a step for us towards transforming failures into lessons that strengthen our workplace and our communities. And for me, why this topic is very important is in Uganda and far beyond, workplace accidents, we all know, have far-reaching consequences. People have lost lives. We have had life-threatening, life-altering injuries, and that has caused economic burdens and emotional trauma. So investigating are not about assigning blames, but it's about understanding the root cause, identifying corrective actions, and building a culture of transparency where reporting failure is not seen as a tool, is seen as a tool for progress, not a blame. So the Vice President said the Health and Safety Association of Uganda, for those who are joining us for the first time, is a professional and non-profit association dedicated to promoting occupational health, safety, and well-being. It serves as a platform for safety professionals, employers, employees, and other stakeholders to collaborate on improving workplace standards. So as an umbrella body, we have been tirelessly working in upholding the professional standards and promoting people-centric organizational transformation. We have had notable achievements over the last few years, including the inaugural OS conference that was last year, in which we launched the International Vision Zero conference that is happening very soon. The Vice President has already elaborated. I am imploring all of you to register and attend in person. So with this few, I would like to give opportunity, hand over the microphone through the MC to our distinguished professor lecturer who is coming to take us through this very important topic, and we do believe and we have confidence that at the end of the day we'll go back as transformed people who are going to have a renewed perception of how incidents should not be taken as a blame but an opportunity for improvement. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you very much to Rachel as the Vice President and Sandy as the President for having or inviting us, the Minerals Industry Safety and Health Centre, to come and speak to you about health and safety topics. So I know that Maureen spoke to you 2 months ago about risk management. So my name is Libby Humphries. I am a lecturer and research fellow with the Minerals Industry Safety and Health Centre. I have the great privilege of speaking to many workers in mining companies about health and safety topics, like risk management and like investigation and health and safety management systems. I have a connection to the country Africa. When I was young, my father worked in sugar mills and refining sugarcane better. So I lived in Kenya for some time when I was young. You have a very beautiful country. So it is fantastic to connect again. Aside from the information about my history associated with working in health and safety and risk management, I've also worked in smelting and obviously mining as well. My family is very busy, so when I was newly with children, we have 3 children that only have 2 years age gap between them. So we had a very busy household, and so I had the opportunity to move into research and education to support the requirements of my family. But now I get to go back to mining, and I really am enjoying the experience. This slide has information about me, so you've already heard my backstory. Moving on to the topics of today. So we will be reflecting on the topic that was covered by Maureen. We'll also then be working through the investigation process. Now, I encourage you, as we work through the investigation process, you're welcome to ask questions through either the chat or the Q&A. So I will be monitoring both of those as we progress through the presentation. I also have a survey that I'm hoping you can engage with as we work through the different topics associated with good investigation processes. To do that, you will require a smart device. So if you have a smartphone, you will be able to easily join in. If you only have a laptop, you'll also be able to join in using a web address. And I will walk you through that shortly as we progress through the session. But my plan for the presentation will start reflecting on the content that was covered by Maureen. I'm hoping that some of you attended that session, but we will reflect on that briefly, as it's important to consider our risk management processes as we work through our investigation activities. Then, as we work through considering event investigations, we're going to talk about why we investigate, what we investigate, and then what the investigation process involves. And then lastly, we're going to discuss our event management system, which is a reflection on our health and safety management system. We're specifically going to focus on roles and responsibilities, competency, verification and monitoring, and the implementation of our actions. So, a reflection back on Maureen's presentation a few months ago, thinking about risk management. During that presentation, she talked about how the number of fatalities that are occurring internationally in mining are not decreasing. In many countries, the number of fatalities that are occurring are remaining consistent. We're not reducing those number of fatalities further, even with all of the activity and I'm sure all of the passion and energy that you apply to trying to improve health and safety in our workplaces. The other interesting data is that the way that fatalities are occurring in mining is the same way that fatalities were occurring 20 years ago. So we have lots of introduction of technology, lots of introduction of automation internationally, but those aspects of mining are not the causes for the events that we still see resulting in fatalities. So our fatalities still result from rockfall or strata failure. They still result from fall from height, from vehicle interactions, from being exposed to electricity, all hazards that have been well known and well understood, and hazards that we clearly understand what good controls look like to effectively manage those hazards. Consequently, through the risk management process, we reflect a lot on understanding what those well-known controls for well-known hazards are, and then ensuring that those controls are implemented effectively to manage that hazard. So the process of thinking about our risk management system then connects to our investigation process. So we want to investigate our incidents to prevent future fatalities, and also those serious life-changing events, those serious life-changing injuries. The way that we evaluate that process through our programs is by using a maturity or a journey model approach, which allows us to reflect on our organisation processes, thinking about whether we're at a basic phase of implementation, a reactive phase of implementation, a compliant, proactive, or an emergent or leading implementation phase for a process. We have these types of models for risk management systems, for critical control management systems, and we also have a model for investigation systems. I'm not going to be working through the whole model during this presentation, but I will be reflecting on or asking you to reflect on some of the questions. In order to do that, I have this survey tool. So I would like you all, if you've got a smart device, now your responses to these surveys are anonymous. You don't put any names on any of your responses. So I really encourage you to be involved and respond to the questions, reflecting on how you feel your organisation investigates at this point in time. So I'll leave this slide up for a minute, and hopefully you can all scan the QR code. If you are having any trouble, please type in the chat. If you can give me a thumbs up if it's working for you. So your thumbs up, if you go to reactions, you should be able to, oh, excellent, thank you. I do love training, and training is much easier when people can give you feedback. So thank you for the people who gave me thumbs up. I'll just leave it there for about 10 more seconds, and what I will do is I will also type it in the chat because there are some people coming in late. Okay, so anyone who comes in late. So for the people who are just coming into the room, if you can scan that QR code or go to echopoll.au and type in the code so you can join the survey. I will move on to the first question. So the first question, why do we investigate? If you can reflect on whether you feel your organisation is basic or reactive or compliant or proactive or leading, and put your responses in the app. There we go. Thank you to the first person to respond. Think. Excellent. I've got 6 responses. Oh, there we go. 8. 11. Excellent. For the people who have just joined the webinar, there is a website you'll see in the chat. It says ecopol.au with that code 2647423 to be able to access the online survey that is currently being completed. To 15. Okay. So looking at the responses about why do we investigate? The most popular or common answer being to ensure the incidents are investigated to learn, to identify, share, store, preserve, and embed lessons to prevent future events. And we have some organisations that have been responded as leading. So it's an accepted important part of the work process. Its purpose is to embed lessons into the work process for continuous improvement and capture what went right as well as what went wrong. So thank you very much to everyone who responded. And there will be more questions. So the purpose of the maturity journey model is to understand that we can have strengths in some areas, but weaknesses in others. So why do we investigate? Your investigation processes have the intent to identify and preserve and embed lessons to prevent events from reoccurring. So why do we investigate? We want to understand what happened. We want to learn from those failures. We want to identify the weaknesses in systems and processes, weaknesses in decision making that possibly allowed that event to occur. We want to prevent reoccurrence. So we want to improve the controls, the procedures, the training, the leadership. We may have a requirement to meet illegal or regulatory requirements. So particularly for more serious events, regulatory bodies may require us to investigate and provide that feedback to those regulators. We want to be able to communicate transparently with our workforce so that we can provide answers to our workers about why events occurred and possibly to the leaders, to their families, possibly to the community about those events and the causes of those events. We want to drive continuous improvement. So they tell us how we as an organisation can improve to keep our workers safe. And we can also investigate to understand if our controls and critical controls are working effectively. So for question number 2, what do we investigate? So have a think about your organisation and think about whether your organisation is basic, so they only investigate the incidents that are required to be investigated by law. Maybe they're reactive, so their investigations are only done on incidents with serious outcomes. Maybe they're compliant, so investigations are done on accidents with actual or potential outcome, both serious and non-serious. Maybe they're proactive. All incidents or events are effectively investigated with a level of investigation that is selected based on the potential rather than the actual outcome. Or leading. So all events or incidents, including acute and chronic health events, are effectively investigated with a level of investigation that is selected based on the potential rather than the actual outcome. Now, just a reminder for the people who came in late, I did put the link to the survey in the chat. I will copy it. So you can go to ecopoll.au and type in the code to join the survey. So I've got 11 responses. There we go. It'd be great if you can respond. For the person who put C in the chat, are you able to use the app, or is the Echo Poll not working for you? Okay, just a few more seconds. If you're still deciding, pop in your answer. Oh, I've got some people putting the response in the chat. Did you select A, B, C, or D or E off your list? Rather than putting it in the chat, you just need to click on the answer that you want to select. Okay. So from the first question, most people responded proactive or leading. We wanted to do investigations so that we could learn and improve. But when we think about what we investigate, what we actually investigate as part of our organisation, then we may find that our responses change a little bit. I've got a question, can we scan again? So if you go to ecopoll.au and type in the code, you'll be able to get into the survey. I will pause for a moment and I will give you the join slide again. Right, we'll get the join slide. We'll get the join slide again next. So thinking about what we investigate as an organisation, we can see that there's more balance across the responses now. So we've got some organisations that are only able to investigate accidents with serious outcomes, or we're only investigating the ones, the baseline of safety events that could have serious and non-serious outcomes. There's some organisations that are doing more investigation, thinking about potential outcomes. Now I have put the join slide back in again, so if you were unable to join, please scan the QR code to join in the survey. Just 5 more seconds. Okay, so hopefully a few more of you are in the survey now. So what do we investigate? This is a short video of an event that occurred in New South Wales recently and was published by, this learning video was published by our New South Wales mining regulator in Australia.
I don't know if it's on my end. I can't seem to hear the sound. I don't know if anyone else is hearing. They could just give a thumbs up if they're hearing the sound, and it's just me.
No.
So an example of an event, a near-miss event that had significant potential as a vehicle with that dozer not seeing the light vehicle. So what do we investigate? Oh, you didn't get the audio. My apologies. Let me just see quickly if I can fix that. And I can play it again. No, I'm very sorry. So that that video was a video of a front-end loader, a very large piece of equipment moving along a haul road. They did not see the light vehicle at the intersection. The light vehicle noticed, identified the loader, and you can see from the dash cam footage, you could see the loader getting closer to them. They had to take evasive action, so they had to drive out into the intersection. Let me go to the video. So the front end loader, you can see it approach from behind, and the light vehicle had to move into the intersection. So the loader operator did not even acknowledge that the event had occurred. They only found out that the event had occurred when they were contacted on the two-way radio by the light vehicle driver. So an example of an event that can occur at our mine sites, and reflecting on what do we investigate in our investigation process. Okay. Hopefully my voiceover made up for the no sound from the video. So we need to think about in our investigation process, what do we investigate? Thinking about fatalities and life-changing injuries, serious exposures, possibly to hazardous substances, gas, dust or chemicals, confirmed or suspected occupational disease, psychological harm or trauma. But we also need to think about near misses or dangerous events. So that video is an example of a dangerous event. There was no consequence, there was no injury, but an event that most definitely could have resulted in a much more serious outcome had the event changed ever so slightly. Does our investigation process allow us to investigate those events? And then reflecting on the acknowledgement of controls and critical controls, known controls for known hazards. Was the event associated with the failure of a known control or critical control? We can also think about investigation in relation to repeat events. So if we've got recurring health complaints or repeated breaches of certain activities, PPE non-compliance, do those activities trigger an investigation process? We can think about weak signals or early warnings. So low-level symptoms or complaints or lots of first aid cases could potentially be a trigger. deviations from safe work procedures, or health monitoring triggers. And we can also consider our investigation process when we're thinking about health and hygiene controls being ineffective or absent, that our monitoring data shows increased exposure to our people, or our workers are reporting discomfort, fatigue, or stress. So understanding that in our investigation process, we can think about the activities or the events we're going to consider to investigate as part of our investigation management system. So I think, can you see the join code on the screen? Let me just check my screen sharing. So the next question in our survey is about the investigation process. So what process does your organisation use to conduct investigations? Under basic, we've got no standardised investigation process. Investigation is ad hoc. Reactive, the process governing investigations is formalised, published and enforced for legislated events. So for those more serious events, that your compliance or your investigation process is aligned to legislated or industry guidelines for investigation. That your process is proactive. So the process for investigations are formalised and reviewed for continued applicability across all types of incidents. Or leading, where the process for investigations is conducted in conjunction with the risk management process, with a focus on identifying controls, evaluating their effectiveness, and understanding the role of critical control effectiveness in the incident. So have a think about your organisation. What type of investigation process do you currently have in place? And thank you very much. So the correct link to join the survey is now in the chat with the code. Thank you very much for your help. So if you're not in the survey, you can join the survey through that link that's in the chat. Okay, so I've got 8 responses so far. Just make sure, so I've got some people that must be in the survey, but their responses are coming in the chat instead of clicking on the answer, the response. So on that list of responses, just click on the response, the one that you would like to select. Okay, interesting. So we've got quite a large group talking about their event investigation process being leading. So it's conducted in conjunction with the risk management process, with a focus on identifying controls, evaluating their effectiveness, and determining the role of critical control effectiveness in the incident. So I've got up to 19. If you haven't put your response in yet, jump in. You've got just a few more seconds. And remembering that these responses are anonymous, so there's no names. Okay, thank you very much. That's very interesting. So the investigation process. The investigation process involves 3 initial steps: the recovery of people or the situation, the preliminary reporting, and then deciding to investigate. When we make the decision to investigate, we have our investigation process, which we'll work through thinking about the scope of the investigation, collecting the evidence to establish the facts, analysing the information, developing findings or recommendations, and then reporting on the outcomes. So the immediate response, safety first. We need to make sure that the area is safe and providing treatment to anybody who's injured. Isolating the area if there's hazards that remain, and making sure that we're accounting for all the people that may be impacted by that event. We need to notify. So we need to notify the right people, contacting emergency services, informing supervisors or managers. If you need to inform the regulator, your regulator body, depending on the type of event. And then we need to consider preserving the scene. So that may involve restricting access, just avoiding disturbing evidence. And avoiding disturbing evidence is really important, whether it's a more minor event that you're investigating internally or a more major event that may require a more formal investigation. Because even for a more minor investigation, allowing that initial review of facts to be able to be achieved without the scene being disturbed is really helpful. So our immediate response, we need to be looking after the people, securing the environment, making sure the environment is safe. We need to notify the right people, and we need to preserve the scene. And then we get to decide to investigate. So on this slide, you'll see that there's several different examples of events. So we've got an example of a person slipping and falling. So the top left hand is an example of a pedestrian that was hit. Fortunately, not a fatality, but they were hit by a dozer. We've got an unplanned explosion during mining operations. In the bottom right-hand corner, this is some data from Queensland around the multiple pneumoconiosis respiratory disease in our coal mine workers. And you can see from that data that there's been a significant increase in cases over the past 7 to 8 years. And would that data, would that information trigger an investigation in your investigation system? So we need to understand in our investigation process that we have the opportunity to make a decision. Do we proceed with investigation? So would we conduct an investigation? And then would we conduct the same type of investigation for each of those events? Once we've decided to proceed with investigating, we need to define the scope of the investigation. So we need to define what is included in the investigation, possibly what's excluded from the investigation. We need to make sure we understand what our organisation processes are to trigger a more detailed investigation or a more formal investigation that may potentially require us to expand the scope. So there's an example on the right-hand side where if we have an event that's occurred and our initial evaluation has it being investigated at a supervisor level, the supervisor may be looking at the immediate causes, a basic review of controls, some statements from the workers, but they may be excluding things like organisational culture or other systems that are part of how that organisation functions. Whereas a more formal investigation may be looking at a far more detailed sequence of events. It may be including a more substantial period of time before or after the event, and it may be considering and including those more detailed systems. So when we're thinking about our investigation process, we need to clearly define what our scope is for our investigation. And our scope for our investigation will influence all of the other aspects of our investigation. It will influence who we interview, it will influence what evidence we look to collect. So we need to think about what our scope is. Recognising, of course, that if we start collecting evidence and we're doing a supervisor level review and we discover evidence that supports it being escalated to a more formal investigation, that we can revisit our scope and expand our scope. So once we've determined our scope, we need to move forward with collecting our evidence. Initially, that involves putting together an evidence plan. So an evidence plan encourages us to think about who we intend to interview. So who are we going to be interviewing and why? What physical evidence do we need to collect? What photographs, videos, maps, what other types of documents do we need to gather as part of our investigation process? Is part of our evidence planning. Secondly, we need to think about our types of evidence. So we've got physical evidence, we've got photographs or videos, we might have video surveillance footage, might have maps, we might have procedures and other documents. We may have interviews, which could be transcripts or recordings. So we've got different types of evidence we need to think about collecting. We need to think about when we're going to collect our evidence. So some of our evidence is far more perishable. For example, witness memories. People that may be involved directly or indirectly with the event, people's memories are really quite poor. So we need to capture that information quite quickly after the event. There may be other types of physical evidence that could perish quickly, things like skid marks or vehicle tracks. And then we may have non-perishable evidence, which is evidence like documents and procedures that are not going to perish over time. And we may have more time to be able to collate that information. And when we're thinking about gathering our evidence, we should try to capture the big picture as well as small details. So an example of that is if you take photographs, always make sure you take photographs of the larger area, and possibly to the point of using maps, as well as taking photographs of the fine details, because you may find that to be really helpful later on when you're doing your analysis. And lastly, you need to think about storage of the evidence. So I get to do some training with our mining inspectors here in Queensland, and I was having a conversation with them, and they were talking about an event that involved a failure of a haul truck. A haul truck experienced a mechanical failure. That resulted in a serious incident, and as part of their investigation, they actually had to do a detailed analysis of that haul truck. They had to hire a shed, a big shed, to store the haul truck in while they were undertaking that investigation. So you need to think about what type of physical evidence you're going to have and where you're going to be able to store it. And then you also need to think about the secure storage of electronic information. So if you've got transcripts of interviews, if you have procedures that you have as part of your evidence, you need to be ensuring that those materials are effectively, securely stored. So collecting our evidence. So we've decided to proceed with investigating. We've determined our scope. We've collected our evidence. And now we want to put together a timeline. Now, the scope of this timeline will be influenced, so your timeline will be influenced by the scope of your investigation. So if you're doing a more formal investigation and your scope is including from, say, for example, when the contractor signed the agreement up until the contractor commenced work, your timeline is going to be much more extended than if your scope is purely looking at just before an event occurred up until just after the event occurred. What we find really interesting with our timeline, so a timeline is really important to understand who was involved at each stage, what controls were in place or missing, what decisions were made, and by whom and where the deviations occurred. But what we find in our research analysis is that the timeline for an investigation usually ends at the point of the event. which means that when we think about our controls, our prevention controls and our mitigating controls, so our emergency response, saving people's lives type of controls, we actually get limited data on the effectiveness of those controls because incident investigations tend to stop at the point of the event. And sometimes it's those controls that have worked to save people's lives. And we should collect that information as well. So we've put together our timeline. And I know from Maureen's presentation a few months ago, she talked about bow tie analysis to help us understand what controls we should have in place, and then to do an analysis of those controls and critical controls to ensure they're effectively supported so they function when we expect them to function. We can use those same tools for our analysis activities, and I'm going to show you the bow tie analysis and how we can use it in our event investigations. So with our event investigations, we've usually got the event. We know what the event was in an investigation. There's been a loss of control, and that's what we're investigating. Understanding that these events, when I refer to known controls for known hazards. So most of these events, there are controls that we would have expected to find in place. The bow tie allows us to think about what the causes were for that event and to consider what controls were in place and failed, or what controls should have been in place, thinking about those controls that we know should exist for those hazards. So the bow tie allows us to think about that. So just to repeat, so what controls were in place and failed, and possibly what controls were missing that we should have expected to find. The other thing that the bow tie allows us to do, so we have prevention controls on the left-hand side and recovery or mitigating controls on the right-hand side. What it also allows us to do is if we have that loss of control event, so we have the vehicle interaction, then once that event occurs, we can reflect on the controls that we have in place that can potentially prevent that fatality. Those controls may be things like windrows or berms that prevent the vehicle going over the edge into the pit. They could be seat belts or rollover protection devices. They could be the amount of time it takes for our emergency responders to respond with the right equipment that could save those people's lives. So the bow tie also allows us to think about those controls and potentially whether they were there when we would have expected them to be there, and if they worked or if they failed. And what that allows us to do is to really understand whether activities like wearing seatbelts, like using rollover protection, like wearing harnesses, working at height, like the amount of time it takes for our emergency response team to respond, to understand whether those controls are saving our workers' lives. The bow tie analysis also allows us to think a bit like our timeline. So it allows us to work in time from left to right. So if we think about in time, we have the cause, then we've got our controls that we're aiming to prevent that unwanted event from occurring. Those controls fail, or maybe they weren't in place. So the event has occurred. Continuing in time to after the event on the right-hand side, what type of activities were there and worked or possibly failed to either prevent that consequence or had us end up with that consequence. So a bow tie analysis can do that for us when we're looking at event investigation. Now, the control support map, for those of you that attended Maureen's session, she will have talked about understanding what makes our controls be effectively implemented. And she would have talked about that involving support activities. So, for example, maintenance or training, competency in our people. She would have talked about verification activities like pre-start checks or management verifications. So in our bow tie analysis, if we identify a control that has failed, we can then work through a control support map to understand which of those aspects of our control failed that resulted in that control not being effective. Ooh. Does anybody have any questions? We've worked through quite a lot.
Okay, if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat, or you can raise your hand. We shall just give an opportunity to three people, just in the interest of time. You can raise your hand and you'll be given rights to unmute, or you can drop your question in the chat. Thank you.
So just to check, Rachel, Paul has asked a question about sharing the slides. Will you be able to share the slides if I send them to you?
Yes. We shall share the slides and the recording on YouTube. The recording will have uploaded to YouTube. We shall share it with the slides as well.
So yes, Paul, we'll be able to share the slides. Okay. So our investigation process, we have done our scope, we've collected our evidence, we've done our analysis, and now we need to think about the causal factors. And I think you might use the language of root causes associated with the events. When we're establishing our causal factors, we need to be ensuring that they are substantiated by evidence. We need to be thinking about those controls that have failed. So which controls did not function as intended, particularly highlighting those ones that may be critical controls, so they prevent serious harm. We need to recognise and acknowledge the controls that worked. It's really important to also collect data on our controls that are functioning as they're supposed to be functioning. Reflecting on the analysis tools that we've used, so we've worked through using a bow tie analysis to understand the threats, the consequences, and the controls, and the potentially failed controls associated with the event. And then we can use our control support map to highlight particular aspects to that failure. So was there an issue with training? Was there an issue with maintenance? Was something missed in a pre-start check? To further understand what our causal factors were that were associated with that event. Understanding that I should be able to look at your causal factors and your recommendations and track them back through the analysis process to the facts that we established during the collection of our evidence. Recognizing that if we are unable to obtain information, we can also reference that in our report. So, for example, if there was somebody that we could not interview, maybe they were on leave, or there were other reasons we couldn't access them to interview. Maybe there were documents that we were unable to access. Maybe there was an area that we couldn't access. We can reference that in our investigation report, and we should reference that in our investigation report. Because we need to always be ensuring that we are reflecting in our recommendations information that has been established through our analysis based on facts that we established during our collection of evidence. Okay. We will do Q&A at the end, there's a question: how easy can we store the investigations of everyday equipment for work? I don't quite understand the question, but we can turn your microphone on during the Q&A and we can have a discussion so I can understand better. So the third part of this conversation is about what I call investigation management systems. Now, I'm sure that most of you are familiar with health and safety management systems, and this is a component, a subset of a health and safety management system. So we can, in an organisation, have the most up-to-date current investigation process. But understanding that as an organisation, we need to have the system to support that process to be effectively implemented, for that process to be effective. And what we're going to talk about briefly are these four components. So a safety management system has many more components, but due to the essence of time, we're just going to focus on these four components of our investigation management system. We're going to start with roles and responsibilities. So for those of you that are in the survey, my apologies if you are unable to access it. I would like for you to think about this question. What is the recognition of roles and responsibilities for your site? Specifically thinking about investigation. So I've got basics, so no formal recognition of investigation requirements are identified in roles and responsibilities. Got reactive, so the investigation responsibilities identified in select specialist roles in the organisation. Compliance, so all personnel are required to understand what an event or incident is within the site and the requirement to respond. Proactive, so we've got a clear hierarchy documented for investigation responsibilities across the site, including all workers, supervisors, managers, senior leadership and subject matter experts. And then we've got leading, so a clear hierarchy is documented and implemented for investigation responsibilities across the site, including all workers, supervisors, managers, senior leadership and subject matter experts. The framework also includes consultation and communication requirements with external organisations such as contractors, suppliers and the community. So have a think about, for your organisation, where is your organisation in relation to the documentation and implementation of roles and responsibilities? I've just posted the link in the chat again if you haven't been able to get into the survey. I've got 10 responses, a couple more Ds. Okay. So the response is showing that quite a few of your organisations have got clear roles and responsibilities. Okay. And then the next question is around competency. So what is the level of investigation training within your site? We've got A, basic, no formal training is given. No knowledge of causation models and investigation methods. I've got B, reactive, basic formal investigation training, some knowledge of investigation methods. C, compliant, investigation training is given, including general knowledge and investigation method used at site, knowledge of underlying causation models used at site. Got D, proactive, skill-based investigation training and development is given, including how to manage motivational and cognitive biases, exposure to a variety of models and methods. Got E, leading, regular investigation training and development tailored to the individual needs across different roles in the organisation, identified through evaluation, with ongoing coaching, including how to identify and manage biases. So have a think for your organisation where you feel the level of investigation training is within your organisation. Okay. All right, interesting. Just 10 more seconds. If you're thinking, pop in a response. Where do you think your organisation is at? Basic, reactive, compliant, proactive, or leading? Okay, so I received a few responses in this chat. A lot more Bs this time than last time. Instead of sitting up around D and E, we've seemed to have quite a few responses sitting around Bs and Cs. A few more organisations with a D, so they've got more skill-based investigation training, but more organisations that have responded thinking about only doing basic formal investigation training, or that we're doing investigation training with some knowledge of underlying causation models. So roles and responsibilities and competency within your investigation management system very much sit together. For our investigation process to be effective, we need to be clear about what different roles in our organisations, what their responsibilities are. But we need to also ensure that those roles have the competency requirements to conduct those responsibilities or to effectively achieve those responsibilities. So depending on how your investigation process is set up in your organisation, so for your senior managers, they may need to develop and support that investigation management system. So to support that, they need to understand what their legislated obligations are. They need to understand what best practice looks like so that they can set up that system effectively. If your system has your mine managers or managers conducting investigations, particularly if they're doing those more formal investigations, we need to be ensuring that those roles have got the skills they need to facilitate a more complex investigation, and that they also understand what their legislated requirements are. For our supervisors, if they've got responsibilities to understand, firstly, what an event is, but then when that event needs to be escalated to a more formal investigation, then they need to have the skill set to be able to facilitate those lower level investigations, and they need to be clear and understand what the trigger process or what the escalation process is if they identify an event that potentially requires a more formal investigation, or depending on your legislation, requires an external investigation or to be notified to your regulator. Your workers have responsibilities as well. They have responsibilities to understand what an event is. So what is an event for your workplace? What events do you want to be able to stop and decide what level of investigation you're going to undertake. Obviously, if there's a serious injury, it's quite clear to a worker, but if it's something like possibly a health exposure to a chemical or a dust, if it's an event that was a near miss where there wasn't a negative outcome, then do your workers understand when they need to identify that an event has occurred and investigation may be required? Do they understand about maintaining the scene? Do they understand how to respond in that immediate first response to an event? Those responsibilities need to be supported by the competencies to ensure that your people can do that effectively for your investigation management system to function as we're intending for it to function. The next key part of your investigation system that we're going to talk about is verification and monitoring. So I'd like for you to have a think about with your survey online, what processes are in place at your site for monitoring the effectiveness of the investigation process? Is it A, so there's no formal approach for monitoring the effectiveness of the investigation process? B, reactive, so only monitoring required under legislation or required by external stakeholders is done? Is it C, audits are conducted by internal or external personnel focusing only on legislation requirements and safety standards? Is it D, proactive, so audits are well defined and prioritised and evaluate the effectiveness of the site investigation process and feedback is provided to the workforce? Or is it leading? Audits are well defined and prioritised with input from the risk management system, considering events connected with material unwanted events, so events that have the potential for the most serious consequence and the failure of critical controls. And that feedback is provided to the workforce and relevant stakeholders. Where do you see your organisation currently sits across these basic, reactive, compliant, proactive, or leading specifications? Okay, I've got a couple of E's that we're leading from the chat, and then there's a few online, so very much seem to be sitting around that middle, compliant. So we audit against legislative requirements, or below that, there possibly not being a formal approach or only monitoring done as required by legislation or external stakeholders. So verification and monitoring is a really important part of our investigation process. And the last area that we'll talk about a little bit more in a moment is the implementation of actions. So we go through and do all the hard work. We've defined our scope, collected our evidence, done our analysis, made our recommendations. What happens to the actions? So what is the process for the implementation of action outcomes from investigations? Is it basic? There's limited or no follow-up of corrective actions? Is it reactive? So there is some informal or sporadic follow-up. Is it basic? So some follow-up is defined and done for specific actions. The purpose is to ascertain implementation. Proactive, so all critical high priority corrective actions are systematically verified and the status reported to relevant stakeholders. Is it leading? The implementation of critical corrective actions is systematically verified and is reflected into the risk management system and incorporated in relevant activity risk assessments. So have a think for your organisation. What do you do with those actions that come out of your investigation process? Got a few responses. I'm quite happy for you to keep putting your response in the chat if you're unable to access the online survey. Well, this is an interesting one. I've got kind of results everywhere. I think more than any of the other questions. I've got a group that are giving me A's for basic. I've got a couple of people giving me D's for proactive. We've got some results around E's for leading. It seems to be very different across different organisations. So understanding in our investigation management system what we do with those actions. So firstly, following up if they're implemented, but then not just following up if they're implemented, but checking that or verifying that they're effectively implemented, that they're actually achieving what we intended for them to achieve to get to that proactive or leading status. So in our investigation management system, we need to be thinking about our investigation process. How are we monitoring and verifying that that process is effective? You know, are we looking at investigations that have been completed? Are we looking at the quality of those investigations that are being completed? And do we understand that we're effectively identifying and reporting our events or our incidents so that the events and incidents are flowing into our investigation process? So we can think about verifying and monitoring our investigation process. But then we also can think about verifying and monitoring our investigation management system. So do we have roles and responsibilities defined? Do we have sufficient competency for our people that need to effectively implement the different parts of our investigation process? And are we looking at how we're implementing those actions to ensuring that not only are they being implemented, but they're being implemented with quality and achieving the outcomes that we intended for them to achieve? And then also thinking about the implementation of actions. So in our implementation of actions, we need to be ensuring that the actions are good quality and that they're connected back to that causal analysis, that they're connected back to the facts and the evidence from our investigation, so that those actions that come from that investigation are clearly connected with that event and with the causal factors that we identified through our analysis and our investigation. Then we need to monitor those actions and ensure they're effectively implemented and achieving what we intended for them to achieve over time. We also need to be ensuring that when we monitor the effectiveness of our investigation management system, that the actions associated with the effectiveness of our investigation management system, that they're consulted with our workforce. So who in our workforce requires particular competencies? Are they actually achieving those competencies? How are we communicating with our workforce about our investigation process, about what an event is, about what actions have been identified and how they've been implemented, and about how we're resourcing, so people, money, time, how we're resourcing the implementation of those actions so that they can be effectively implemented. So our investigation management system, we can put all our energy into developing best practice in our investigation process. But if we don't ensure that our investigation management system is going to support that process, by thinking about what roles and responsibilities do I have in our organisation? What competencies do I require in my organisation for this process to work effectively? how are we implementing those actions? If we're not, how are we monitoring and verifying whether the system is working effectively? If we don't have all of those pieces in place, then that best practice investigation process is still not going to achieve the outcomes that we're expecting or hoping for it to achieve for our organisation to continuously learn and improve. So we've been on quite a journey. We've talked about how 2 months ago, Maureen Hassel talked to some of you, or possibly all of you, about risk management and how we can manage those potentially fatal hazards, recognising that we have not introduced new ways of resulting in fatalities in our mining environment. The causes of fatalities have been the same for the last 20 years. And those causes have known controls. So reflecting that information into our investigation process, understanding why we investigate. So we investigate the events that have lifelong injury impacts or fatality impacts, but recognising that we can expand that definition of why we investigate. Sorry, that's the what do we investigate. Why we investigate, we want to be preventing those events from occurring or from reoccurring. What we investigate, so we investigate those fatalities or serious injuries, but recognising we can also be thinking about investigating those events that have the potential for those significant consequences, but also the events that are associated with health or chronic disease, so exposures to dust or chemicals. Also thinking about where in our investigation process we consider the failure of controls or critical controls. We talked about the investigation process, understanding that we need to manage the scene, respond to the emergency, support anybody who's injured, maintain the scene, notify the right people, but that we have that opportunity to decide then, does this event require an investigation or does it not? And we can define that in our investigation process. Then in our investigation process, we think about the scope of the investigation. We put together an evidence plan, we collect our evidence, we develop a timeline for the event, conduct our analysis. The tools I showed you today, we're using a bow tie to do that analysis, and then using that control support map to understand those controls we identified has failed in our bow tie, what aspects of that control caused that failure. Then we can take those causes from our bow tie analysis and from our control support map to develop causes for our event. And those causes are based on evidence to develop our recommendations in our report. Also ensuring that we acknowledge information that maybe we couldn't receive as part of the investigation. And then I've worked through the event or the investigation management system. Only 4 components of it. So like your health and safety management system, there are many aspects, but 4 key components being, we need to ensure that our investigation system is mapped through our roles and responsibilities for our workforce. We need to ensure that those workers have got the right competencies to complete those activities effectively. So if our supervisors are conducting a level of investigation, what competency are we giving them to do that effectively? We need to be verifying and monitoring our investigation process. Are the events being identified? Are the investigations good quality? Are the actions specifically relating back to the causes, and are they being effectively implemented? Remembering that our risk management system and our investigation system all link together. So by doing effective investigations, we can more clearly understand, based on data, whether our controls are performing as we expect them to from our risk management process. I would like to open the floor to any questions. You can type them in the chat, you can put your hand up and we can allow you to speak. I know that there was a question a little while ago that I did not understand. Let me go back. So there's a question in the chat, how easy can we store the investigations of everyday equipment for work? So if you are happy to put your hand up so we can unmute you, and can you explain your question, unless I've answered it for you as I've progressed? I think.
Ivan, are you still on the call? Mulango Ivan, if you're still on the call, just raise your hand and we shall allow you to speak. Any other person with a question, you can as well raise your hand, or you can type it in the chat. We shall pick it up from there.
Ivan, I think that you can just unmute yourself now and speak. Yep. I see that there's also, oh, my apologies. Go ahead.
Okay,
I also see that there is a, sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
There is a feedback form in the chat. So if you would like to fill out the feedback form, that would be much appreciated.
Okay, we don't have any hands up. Does this mean Libby was very clear or we didn't understand anything? If you have any questions, just drop them in the chat or raise your hand so that you can ask and be supported when we still have the expert on the call.
I hope that everyone is not feeling too overwhelmed. It's a lot of information in just over 1 hour. But my email address is on the screen, so I'm always happy if you would like to reach out. If you have any questions afterwards, but you will also receive communications about the online. Oh, we have a hand. Is that Brian?
There's also Ivan.
Oh, Ivan is back.
Ivan, you can just unmute and speak. I can't seem to see the hands on my end. Angelina, are you able to support from your side?
I can do some as well.
I don't see any hands. Oh,
So I've got
I
Brian with the hand up.
His mic is enabled. Even Brian, just unmute.
Yeah.
Yeah, Samuel, just unmute and ask your question.
Okay, thank you so much. In fact, it's quite impressive to join this session. Actually, joining from Ghana to be precise, it's very very impressive. And in fact, I've actually enjoyed the session with Libby. And my question is, my question has got to do with let's say with regards to this incident investigation that we conduct. Generally, does it have a link? Please, can I be heard?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So my question has got to do with the incident investigations that we conduct currently in, I mean, considering what Libby shared with us, which was really insightful and I've actually learned a lot from. My question has got to do with when it comes to incident investigation and how we run it, does it apply always in every setting? I mean, when you come aside the workplace, does it also apply outside the workplace? Let's say when there is an issue with regards to where there is police and all those stuff will have to come in. Can some of these techniques be applied to it as well?
Sorry, let me try to ask the question back to you so I understand. So are you, is your question, can we apply these same investigation methods for incidents that happen away from site? Is that your question?
Yes, Libby does it.
Most definitely, yes. So these investigation processes, same as the risk management processes, are processes that can be used for all types of event investigations. You could use the bow tie analysis for an environmental event in the same way.
Okay, thank you so much. But I've really liked the presentation. Your slides too were very, very interactive, and how you also conducted the poll, I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Libby, we have a question in the chat from Simon. He says, how many people should constitute the investigation team and who could those be in an organization?
That is a very good question. And I would ask the same question if you were doing a risk assessment. So if you are doing what I call an activity risk assessment, in Australia we might call them JSAs, job safety analysis, you have to think about who is going to be in the team to do the risk assessment. You have to think the same way for an investigation, to think about who needs to be involved. So depending on the detail of the investigation, you may require an experienced facilitator, but you need to have in the room people that have subject matter expertise. You may need to have in the room not the people that you are interviewing, but for example, if you had a haul truck incident, then maybe a haul truck operator from a different area would be a good member of the investigation team as a subject matter expert. But for a more formal investigation, you may have many more people involved, possibly external subject matter experts. So it may depend on the type or the detail that you require in your investigation.
Okay, Simon, I hope that answers you. If you're content, you can just give a thumbs up. If you have any follow-up questions, you can as well post them. The rest from the chat, just saying thank you for the presentation. It was informative, impressive. Thank you to Shah for organizing.
I have John with a hand up. John, you can use your microphone, John, if you would like to unmute and ask your question. John? No, I've lost John again.
Your mic is enabled. You can speak.
Oh.
John, unmute. Oh, no.
Libby, as we wait for John to unmute, I think Ivan has rephrased his question. And he says, for a small company, is it necessary for the storage of any material or equipment that should be stored for investigation until it's done? I think this is on preserving the accident or incident scene. For a small company, is it necessary for the storage of any material or equipment that should be stored for investigation until it's done?
That will depend on the level of event. So here in Australia, if you were to have a very serious event that resulted in a fatality or a serious injury where our regulator was going to pursue prosecution to give you a fine or take you to court, then there are rules around how long you have to store that evidence for. If it's an investigation for you inside your company, then you can decide how long you're going to store that for, unless there is something in your legislation that says you have to keep it longer. Does that answer your question, Ivan? John, are you there?
Hello. Am I now clear?
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much, Humphries, for your presentation. It was quite wonderful, educative, and focused. There are some cases where investigation process becomes a challenge to the safety world. I'll give an example or a scenario where that vehicle incident, that wheel loader, which has maybe crashed with that car, and because of some other conditions which were beyond the driver or the wheel loader operator, these investigations go, and through its process ends up in the hands of the driver. And then the driver or the wheel load operator will be allowed or will be given the penalty of paying some of those other damages, which is really not good, because it impacts bad into the investigation process and then the investigation team. What could be your advice, Humphrey, in terms of this situation where health and safety should be promoted in order to encourage free and fair atmosphere, as well as open discussions in the investigation process? Thank you.
This is where having an effective risk management process is very helpful, because your example of vehicle interaction, so vehicle crash, is a very well understood hazard in mining. And there are many causes that can result in having a vehicle interaction. And our bow tie analysis allows us to identify those multiple causes and think about and understand what controls we should have in place to prevent that vehicle interaction occurring. Now, in an investigation, we should be using that information, considering the causes relevant to that event and the controls that should have been in place to support preventing that event from occurring. Investigations most commonly have many causes, not just one, especially for our potentially fatal hazards that we have in mining. Does that help with your question, John?
Yeah, thank you. I have got a summary of what you've answered, and I would feel on the other side, I was saying, how can HSC be supported in terms of these cases where HSC becomes the lead person? Of course, they become the spot-on person at the end of the investigation. Safety becomes the spot-on person because the impact comes back that is safety that has done this, safety that has initiated this execution results. So on your perspective, that's what I just wanted to get. Any other impact?
Yeah. I get to do training in Chile and Peru, and I was asked by my students, what is the difference between health and safety culture in Australia to health and safety culture in Chile and Peru? My answer to them was that when I run training about risk management and investigations in Australia, most of the people attending the training are operations managers, they are shift supervisors, they are maintenance managers, and only some safety people. When I go to South America, all the people who attend the training are safety people. My advice for you is to aim to improve competency across your operations and maintenance roles of understanding the importance of the investigation process and how they can support the investigation process working effectively. It's a big ask. It's a big journey. We are fortunate in Australia that we are supported by our legislation, making it compulsory for our operations people to have risk management and investigation competencies to do their jobs. It helps us in the implementation of health and safety. I have two hands. I have Simon and Norman. Simon, you can unmute and ask your question.
All right. Thank you so much for the presentation, and of course the team that made this session came out nicely. My first question was clearly answered, the one I shared on the chat. But this one comes another one that once an investigation is done, and of course, the results is out, some organizations may tend to to hide it out from the public, maybe due to the sensitivity, the confidential findings that comes out of that finding. Is it logical, or is it under the law that such kind of report be hidden out from the public, or whatever the results that come out from the investigation should be shared with the general public such that people can know what really happened? Yeah, basically that is what I'd wanted to really understand.
And this is where good quality investigations are really important, to balance the people aspects of an event with other factors that impacted or potentially caused that event. Whether it's associated with equipment, whether it's associated with road conditions or environmental conditions, it is really important to have a good quality, balanced investigation and ensure that the causal factors clearly map back to the evidence. So transparency is very important in an organisation, especially with the more serious of events that may have had serious consequences or potentially had serious consequences. It is very important for safety culture in your organisation to be able to communicate the outcomes of those investigations to your workers, which generally in mining, if you communicate it to your workers, it gets communicated to the community as well, because those two groups are usually very closely connected. So good quality and balanced investigations are really important.
Yeah, that's clear. That's clear. Thanks so much.
Norman? Thank you, Simon. Norman, you can unmute your microphone, and I think we've probably got time for one more question.
Norman, unmute.
Oh, okay, we might go to, is it T Silver? You can unmute your microphone.
Silver,
Okay,
unmute.
Samuel, you can jump in if you would like to unmute your microphone.
Okay. So this good submission you give actually brings to mind this other question that I have. See, when it comes to incident investigation, there is this normally that we do. Often we always want to ensure we have a good quality, a balanced investigation as possible as we can. However, what are some of the common pitfalls or sometimes the biases that sometimes as investigators we should be aware of, so that we can be able to have mitigative controls in place to make sure we do good investigation?
That's a very good question, Samuel. And I can't give you a very easy answer other than ensuring that your investigators have good competency. So they have had good training, but also ensuring that you have a good group conducting the investigation to help balance biases from other team members. So being really clear that the facilitator or the person doing the investigation has good skills and has had good training, but also that the investigation team is well balanced to help identify those biases, but also to work through those biases to create a more balanced investigation.
Okay, okay, thank you so much. This is sometimes the challenge we face in the course of administering our work operations. So thank you for the insight.
Yes, it's very challenging if you only have one person doing a very complex investigation.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much, Humphries.
So, are there any more questions in the chat?
Yes, we have a question from Ivan. He asks, how do you go with the challenge of lack of cooperation at a workplace, since it may need the eyewitnesses? I think, how do you handle lack of cooperation in the workplace during investigations?
It's a very good question, Ivan. Thank you for all your good questions. Interestingly, when I speak to our inspectors in Queensland, what they will tell me, and many of them used to be police officers, they will tell me that they collect the evidence and the interview with the witnesses is verifying the evidence that they've already received or put together. So there are lots of ways we can establish causal factors, and we know that witness statements are very unreliable. So they can be inconsistent for lots of reasons, like completely unintentional reasons, just because as human beings, our memory is not very good for lots of details. We can remember very specific things, but not necessarily all the things. So your investigation should focus more on other types of evidence. Doing interviews can help with that process. They can guide you in the right direction, but your investigation should not be entirely reliant on eyewitness statements because they are unreliable. So if you can't get the access, or the people don't want to be interviewed, and think about a very serious event, it would be quite reasonable for an eyewitness to not want to have to relive whatever they experienced. So as investigators, it means that we need to be more creative or innovative in the way that we collect our evidence, understanding that some witnesses, for all different reasons, will not want to have to be interviewed after an event.
Libby, there's a question I got in my inbox. Someone asked, are all incidents worth investigation? And then the other question was, which advice would you give to an HSE in charge who doesn't have full commitment from his bosses?
So the first question, should all incidents be investigated? That is a really interesting question. Your investigation management system will define what you choose to investigate. And you need to ensure that your investigation management system is able to be achieved by your organisation with the resources that you have. So as a senior HSE person, you can think about how you define what you're going to investigate. Because we don't want to have a rule to investigate everything, because there are some events that we know even if we do an investigation, there will not be learnings that will come out of it that will add value or improve safety in our organisation. So we have to find a balance in how we define what we're going to investigate to make sure that we are investigating the events that will give us the learnings to improve. What that means for your organisation is something that you are able to define. And we are the same here in Australia. So we have events that are very serious and we have to investigate them, but other events that do not have to get reported to our regulator, the organisations can decide in their management system what level of investigation, or if they're going to choose no investigation for that event.
Thank you, Libby. I will just pick 3 questions before we close, because you're already at it's already 1 and the webinar is supposed to end at 1. Just 3 questions from people that haven't asked before. Isaac wants more insights in line with investigation timelines. And then Norman couldn't unmute, so his question is he needed guidance on the lookouts while dealing with purportedly planned or framed incidents. We deal with workers whose actions get influenced by negative advisors for forward-seen intentions. I hope that is clear to you. Then the last one we can take from today's webinar. From Mary, she says, is the investigation process for a breach of safeguarding, for example, sexual harassment and an accident incident, the same? We can
So
do
I'm
those
going to
3
answer
questions.
Mary's question first. Mary's question is the easy one. Yes, the investigation process is the same. You're still going to put together a scope for your investigation. You're still going to put together an evidence plan. What evidence are you going to collect? Who are you going to interview? You're still going to do an analysis of that evidence to then identify your causal factors and to develop recommendations. Obviously, the environment and the work of the investigator for those 2 events is going to be a bit different, but the process for the investigation remains the same. Are top managers allowed to be part of the investigation team? Yes, they are. And it shows their commitment to health and safety if they choose to be. But their role in the investigation team needs to be clear. So they can be there as a subject matter expert. They can be there as a facilitator.